In this video, we're going to be reading through John 1 through 18, the opening monologue of the Gospel of John. In these opening verses, John signifies by saying, "In the beginning was the Word," that Jesus, the pre-existent Word of God, was in existence for all time. Before time began, before the creative act recorded in Genesis, Jesus was. And he was a full participant in the creation of all that is. In fact, John identifies him using the word word. And word to the Hebrews would be synonymous with the vocal pronunciation that God made in Genesis, as well as the law given to Moses and the word spoken through the prophets. So by using this word logos, or word, John is connecting all of that Jewish background into the identity of Jesus himself. So we see here that John wants us to understand right from the start that Jesus was God. Jesus is God, and that he participated in creation. When he moves on from there, he says, "Through him all things were made that were made, and without him nothing was made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." We get two more abstract terms. As we mentioned in the introduction, John is fond of these abstract terms, light and life. Light is a classic dualism. Light and darkness are the classic dualisms of good and evil, and life versus death. So when John, at the end of this poetic introduction, says, "The light shines in the darkness," the word shines there is in the present tense, meaning it continues to shine. But the darkness has not overcome it, meaning light wins. Darkness has not defeated the activity of God, but light has defeated the activity of darkness. Some translations might say, comprehend it. I think in this setting, I like to understand that as overcome it. Light wins. God's activity is greater than the activity of darkness. Moving on from there, the focus shifts in verse 6 to John the Baptist. Although John the Baptist is never referred to by the term the Baptist in the Gospel of John. But here we have John identified as a witness. We need to distinguish, or John wants to distinguish, between Jesus, the Christ, the Messiah, the pre-existent God, and the witness, John the Baptizer. And so he says that John came as a witness. He was sent from God, he was born as a man, and he came to proclaim that Jesus was the true light and to prepare the way for him. He says in verse 9, "The true light," to distinguish the fact that Jesus is the true light and John the Baptizer was just the witness to that light. "He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him." The irony of the fact that Jesus, the Word of God, was there at the beginning. Through him, everything was created in creation. And yet, when he entered creation in the form of a man, his own creation did not recognize him as God. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. His own. There's two meanings to this word, this phrase in verse 11. The first, his own, is probably a reference to all of creation. He came to creation. And then when it says he came to that which was his own, there is a reference to his own people. And so he came to creation, and he came to the Jews, and they did not recognize him. All of creation did not recognize him as God, and the Jews in particular did not recognize him as Messiah. But here is the gospel good news within the Gospel of John. But to those who did receive him, those who believed in him, he gave the right, probably better translated, the power, the ability to become children of God. How do you become a child of God? You become a child of God by believing in his Son, by placing your faith in his Son. And then he distinguishes the form of birth that makes us children of God from what we would consider to be normal human birth. And he distinguishes it in three ways. He says, born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, nor of a husband's will, but born of God. And if you look in the text, the first one is really born of blood, the blood associated with birth. The second one would be born out of sexual desire. And the third one would be born of the will of man, of the union of husband and wife and the man's desire for children, for offspring. Rather, the birth here, to become a child of God, is associated with being born of God. I think this is a link that we will connect with later when we talk about Nicodemus, where Nicodemus is told, you must be born again. And he says, how can you be born again? Jesus says you must be born by water and the Spirit. To be born of God, to be a child of God, you must be born through faith in his Son. Continuing on from there, John says that the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We've already alluded to that in the first verse where he says, in the beginning was the Word. Now here in verse 14, he picks up that language, the Word, and he says the Word became flesh. It was the incarnation. This is John's birth narrative. The other Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, include some depiction of Jesus' birth to Mary. Here, John simply says the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. He tabernacled among us. He set his tent among our midst. It's an allusion to the Old Testament idea that that God was with the Israelites. Moses used to go to the tent of meeting and meet and discuss things with God and receive God's will there. Here it says that Jesus tabernacled. He made his dwelling among us, which is a reference to the fact that Jesus came to creation and is among us. And so Matthew would say that his name is Emmanuel, which means God with us. John is expressing the same thing in this opening monologue by saying he made his dwelling among us. And then it says, we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, the monogenes, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. We have seen his glory. John shifts to the first person plural, and that makes this a confessional statement. We, the people in this congregation, the people in John's church, he says, we have seen his glory. We are witnesses to his glory. I, the Apostle John, am a witness to Jesus' glory. Now the law came through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Full of grace and truth. We'll continue with that in just a moment. Verse 15 wants to again go back to John the Baptist and to claim that John certifies that Jesus is greater than him. Again, he's trying to distinguish between John as the witness versus John being the Messiah. So he quotes John, who says, this is he of whom I said, he who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me. Out of his fullness, we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Here we have that phrase again, grace and truth. Grace and truth, if it was in the Old Testament, would be faithfulness and steadfast love. You can trace this through the Septuagint. So these two words, grace and truth, really need to be understood in the Hebrew dictionary. And in the Hebrew dictionary, these are precisely the two words that are used to describe God in Exodus 34 and verse 6. Full of faithfulness and steadfast love. Jesus is the revelation of God. Jesus is the depiction of faithfulness and steadfast love. The steadfast love of the Father who sent the Son into creation to reveal himself, to give the opportunity that all those who receive him could be born and designated children of God. And so at the end he says, no one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. That's the declaration of the purpose of the Gospel of John, to depict Jesus and to reveal Jesus as the revealer of God. These are powerful verses that form the foundation of John's Gospel. Jesus reveals the true God, a God who is faithful, a God who is true, a God who gives life, and a God who invites us to be his children through faith. Faith in his Son and the declaration that Jesus was the Christ.